Good evening. My name is Joe Sam Robinson. It's my pleasure to have with us tonight, once again, the famous Dr. Buck Melton.
Greetings.
Buck, besides your many, many attributes, you also are a member of the Georgia Bar, are you not?
I am.
Is that correct?
Yes.
And thus equipped to opine on various legal matters.
Well, that reminds me of a one-panel cartoon I once saw of two students sitting in a liberal arts class, and one saying to the other, I don't understand why they're making me take this class. I already have an opinion on everything. So yeah, I can opine. I don't know how valuable it will be.
Well, I think the nation has been transfixed over the past weeks over the workings of the criminal justice system in Wisconsin and in Georgia. And verdicts appeared in those cases actually in the past several days. One acquittal, one conviction. And just to consider how things work, can you make any statement about the difference in the criminal justice system in different states, different areas? The state codes determine what happens, isn't that correct? So each state has their own criminal justice system, subject to the purview of the feds.
Yeah, everything's got to comport procedurally with, of course, the federal Constitution. And, of course, the federal government's got its own criminal system as well. You can violate federal criminal statute. But generally speaking, almost all of these, with the partial exceptions of California and Louisiana being the two biggest, follow the common law system. And that means that the law is generally the same in all of these states. So if you go to law school in Georgia, then you're perfectly equipped to take the bar in Oregon or Washington State. So there's not a tremendous amount of difference.
Now, just to make a comment, in general, the criminal justice system does a lot of things, but one thing it does is protect property. It makes the effort to do that. And some people would say, well, that discriminates against people that don't have any possessions. Thus, there have been numerous efforts to change bail arrangements to make bail either non-existent or very small for poor people. There have been numerous efforts to say that the criminal justice system is tilted against minorities and against poor people, and efforts have been undertaken to try and reform that. Do you have any comments just about, as we proceed to discuss these two cases, with the backdrop of substantial attentions to attempt making the criminal justice system fairer, whatever that means? At least people presume they can do that. But any thoughts about that?
How long do you have? That's
a
massive.
Is how long does our audience have?
Yeah, that's a massive can of worms. I mean, in some ways, there have been huge advances in the last 100 years, really in the last 75 or 80 years. During the Earl Warren Court from the mid-1950s down to 1969, there was a real revolution in criminal procedure that really made the system much more accessible to lower income groups. Probably the most famous example is the Gideon versus Wainwright case, which prior to Gideon versus Wainwright, the assistance of counsel clause of the Fifth Amendment usually did not extend to cases where you could not afford counsel yourself. So if you were poor and you couldn't afford a lawyer, well, too bad. It's rough to be you. But Gideon versus Wainwright essentially made it incumbent on the government to provide public defenders in all felonies. On the other hand, in the larger scheme of things, lower income groups, they don't have the same access to high quality criminal defense. There have been many judges from the bench who have spoken about the tremendous caseload that public defenders have, that the almost cursory work that they have to do, and it's just really a travesty. And if you want to go the full Marxist route, Marx says essentially that all of law is put together by the propertied class for the sole purpose of protecting that property. The system is rigged. So choose your approach there.
Well, that's a good little run around the bases. Presumably, and this happens on many fronts, the idea that bail, it should be low or high, or let people out on bail. Let them, presumably, if a bail is some big number, whatever big number is, and a person is penniless, they're just going to have to stay in jail until their trial. Is that an uncommon event, or have there been changes in the bail laws to let people out?
Well, first of all, you don't have to pay the whole bail usually because of the bail bondsman out there, which helps to a considerable degree. But the Eighth Amendment, which is known as the Cruel and Unusual Punishment Clause, also contains a prohibition against excessive bail. But excessive, in most cases, that's really a dead letter. That as long as the bail is proportionate to the gravity of the crime, I can think of very few cases offhand that have found that the bail imposed was truly excessive. So not much going on there.
Many people have said, there are occasional horrific events that occur. There was one, I think, in Wisconsin where a person was let out on very low bail and promptly killed and injured many people. Mm-hmm. And occasionally that happens, and publicity follows, that a person was let out of prison with a very low bail and then commits some kind of heinous crime. And so there's at least an argument out there to be restrictive about letting people that are obviously criminals out of jail. Any thoughts about that?
Well, a couple of points. Point number one, I'd have two responses, and of course that is a tragedy when that occurs. I think any reasonable person would have to concede that is not something that's desirable. But against that, you have the great statement of Sir William Blackstone: it's better than 10 guilty men go free than for one innocent man to be punished. That shows that's our bias in a civil libertarian society. But even more to the point, if you're out on bail, the presumption of innocence is operating in your favor. You're not a criminal at that point. You're the accused.
Yes.
You may not even be the defendant if a criminal information or a criminal complaint hasn't been filed. And we need to keep that in mind. Now, on your side of the equation, we have learned a great deal, and you're better placed to speak about this than I am, over the last 100 years about neuroanatomy, the working of the human psyche, the structure of the brain, which gives us insights now into responsibility or lack of responsibility that we just did not know until the last century or certainly the last 2 centuries. And so what if you've got someone who truly isn't responsible for his actions in the way that we understand it? And one of the typical arguments is you were raised in a bad situation, you were abused, you were a cracked baby, there's obviously some sort of developmental problem with your brain. But on the other hand, that's a two-edged sword, because if part of the impairment is you have no impulse control, and you've been accused or at least arrested for cutting people up with chainsaws, and if we let you out, we know that you're going to go cut up people with chainsaws before your trial. What do we do with that? Well,
that would appear to be a substantial philosophical issue to get entangled with. Mm-hmm. But I think if people look at the number of people that are incarcerated for various criminal actions, a large percentage of them have certifiable mental illness. Their brain, you could do a number of studies on neuronal structure, neuronal function, and many people are impaired, and as they go through life's travails, for many reasons, they run afoul of the law. They have a predisposition to do that. So is that something to consider philosophically? People that have a predisposition to injure other people or various kinds of crimes. And the law requires those people to be released knowing that they are just a casual observer could say, this person is dangerous to be on the street, yet the law mandates almost no bail, we're turning them loose, and out they go. And I think, particularly in New York City, that's caused substantial problems, and the legislature in New York State has promulgated major laws to reduce bail or the ability to hold people after a criminal charge. Do you have any thoughts about that? And then we can sort of mosey on into the issues with Rittenhouse and Aubrey. We can mosey into that. But
Yes.
what do you think about the New York legislature, the way it's, and many people are violently opposed to it, particularly, I think, when riots take place, almost everyone is turned loose, and off they go. Any thoughts?
Yes. Well, once again, we're still, I think, at a philosophical level here. Your first question is, what is the criminal justice system designed to do, or what, in our society, what should be its main function? And there are two very basic choices there. Is it designed to punish the offender, or is it designed to protect society? And depending on which one of those is what you want to emphasize, you may get very different results. If it's to punish the offender, and the offender is at some level not responsible for his actions, that we diminish to some degree the historical concept of free will, then that would suggest militate against holding them. We ought to let him loose. I mean, if he's not responsible, then we can't punish him for what he's not to blame for. If it is to protect society, then you perhaps get a very different answer there. Now, there are different gradations as to within both of these categories, but that's the basic choice that you're facing. Really, until the 60s or 70s, you've heard, of course, not guilty by reason of insanity.
Yes.
And that's the idea of letting someone out. And that doesn't really happen a great deal. The criminal definition of insanity is actually fairly narrow. There used to be, back in the old days, guilty but insane, in which case I think they would often shunt you off into a mental health facility. There are some shades of that, of course, in the famous Angette Lyles case in Macon, Georgia, that I'm not sure that she was clinically insane. I think the governor at the time said he was not going to be the first governor to execute a white woman, but back during the times of racial segregation.
Yes.
So they shunted her off into Milledgeville.
Yes.
But that's the idea. So.
Well, is there a third option, or I guess dog in the fight, so to speak, is reforming the criminal or the person that's doing these antisocial actions? Now, I think the Chinese are good at that, so there are different kinds of, maybe the North Koreans are pretty good at it. But you're reforming people, so is that a reasonable objective of the criminal justice system?
Well, it depends on what you mean by reforming. I think whatever they're doing in China or in North Korea to reform people probably is not what we would think of when we use that term. Although if you go back to Jeremy Bentham, which roughly 200 years ago, not quite 200 years ago, when Bentham suggested that one of the main functions of a criminal justice system would be to reform the criminal. And we have some vestiges of that still today. And the best known vestigial element of Benthamite approach is what do we call the prison system in Georgia, the Department of Corrections, which that's a reformist idea.
Yes.
And at one level, I mean, if you're teaching people a valuable trade, if you have a prison library there, if you let them get their GED, that's kind of in the direction of reform. But if you've got some sort of serious developmental or neurological issue there that you can't simply fix them by educating them, what do you do with that?
Well, I mean, I think I'm going to avoid getting into the ethics, the Jeremy Bentham's ethics versus the another set of ethics, which would be the the individual before the group, whatever is better to let one guilty person go free.
10 guilty persons go
right,
free.
10 and one.
Than to let one innocent person.
Right. 10. Let's have those numbers right. So the two are often, if you consider ethical issues in the world, that's the way to think of it. And the problem with the Bentham is that often it can be a springboard for the state saying, well, for the greater good of the greater number, I've decided to shoot 100 people so 1,000 can live, or so all kinds of heinous excesses of power on the part of the state saying this is an ethical thing to do. And many of the great crimes against humanity that's been the logic for that. Now, as much wrong, I guess as wrong as you could say it was. Well, now let's mosey on into these recent trials. One issue is between the two is to consider the defense counsels in both trials, and was there any qualitative difference in the defense counsels and who paid for the defense counsels? And was there some effort to stop money coming to the defense counsels? And if you're, many people might say this, well, you've got a lot of money and you're going to just lawyer up and spend a huge amount of money in your defense. And if you're a poor person, you're just going to have a state defender who's going to show up rushed and hurried and make some kind of efforts at your defense.
Yes.
So therefore they're unequal. And just, I don't know, do you have any thoughts about what happened with the counsel in each of the trials and who paid for them, and was there a difference in their quality?
Yeah. I didn't follow either of these cases particularly closely, so I don't think, I could be wrong about this, I don't think there were public defenders in either case.
Yes.
I think that probably, given the national sensation both of these cases caused, I think the defense probably had some deep pockets in both instances. If you have any
No,
additional
what I'm
information.
getting into
Yeah.
is apparently there were, with the Rittenhouse trial, I don't know.
I imagine that he was well funded.
Well, there was an effort to find huge amounts of money came in,
Yes.
and allegedly there were efforts to punish people who contributed to his defense. And there are different efforts to try and stop the defense from receiving money.
What efforts? I mean, public efforts?
Well, I mean, these
Yeah,
are all possibly apocryphal stories, but someone sent money in, and they were fired for having done that, and then there were accusations that there's some way that the people that wanted to send Rittenhouse to prison, or presumably worse, we're finding a way to stop the money from coming in. I've at least, that's something that's been out there.
Well, now if it was a public employee who was fired by a government official, I mean, you've probably got a cause of action there. But if you sent in money and your practice fired you for that, that's
Yes.
between you and your practice. I mean, I don't.
I think this was a public official. I think it was a policeman, possibly, that sent money in. But let that be that as it may. The next question to ask is, the money playing a role in these different trials, what about external influence on the trial? And for instance, maybe a hostile courtroom was there, and then the money or efforts to assist the prosecution. So apparently one of the things that happened in the Aubrey trial is the local, it's a complicated story, but a huge amount of state resources, more than usual, went into the prosecution, and I think they brought a prosecutor in from possibly Cobb County. I don't know the merit of that story, and certainly the governor was acting to attempt to at least present fairness and considering the difficult racial situation that the state has endured over the years. We may really ever going to be very fair here, but the state can put substantial resources in as it wishes into prosecution, and also different kinds of pressure groups could play a role. So the amount of publicity that was out there, the just attention that was going on, the people that went into the courtroom, and the pressure on politicians to do one thing or another. So apparently, the Rittenhouse story was the prosecution was influenced by all the attention of 2020 to prosecute this person, and Rittenhouse, and many people have said, well, that was quite inappropriate to do that. So at least pundits on television would say, well, I've looked at the facts, and if I were a prosecutor, I'd never bring this forward. But there's political pressure on prosecutors, and one of the stories out there now is that the justice system has been subverted by putting prosecutors, that Soros money has been said to be involved, and I'm sure things go the other way on the right. But the power that a prosecutor has to decide what to do is pretty awesome. Any comments about that?
Well, that's always been the case, and I don't think there's anything that can be done about that. The reason we have the Bill of Rights, the criminal procedure, the Fourth, Fifth, Sixth, and Eighth Amendments in particular, are that, and this is certainly true today, but it's always been true. It was true in the Founders' Day. It was true in medieval England. It is more true today than ever before that no individual can stand up against the resources of the government if the government brings its entire law enforcement and investigative machinery to bear on someone. The government can find evidence, it can manufacture evidence if you want to get underhanded about it, it can swamp you with lawyers, and the only real weapon that the defense has is the rigorous enforcement of these criminal procedural provisions, which is why they need to be as strong as possible. Once again, I don't think any reasonable person wants a guilty person to go free, but the government's always going to have this power unless you want to do away with the criminal justice system completely. And different executive officials, prosecutors, have had different agendas. They want to do different things, which is why we need to have very strong criminal procedure defenses available, as well as to make sure that the judge is as neutral as possible. But
well,
beyond a certain point, we just can't go.
Just to query this, yes. Many times people that are prosecutors and indeed judges are part-time politicians. Mm-hmm. They've been elected, and they're playing to an audience to stay in power. Unlike European countries, where it's a sort of a career. If you're really a smart person, you become a prosecutor or a judge, and you're insulated from any political impact. Kind of like maybe once you get on the Supreme Court, maybe, but is the role of politics in the criminal justice system, is that a problem? And particularly if you look at all the controversy in the country now, a lot of it involves, well, we're going to get Donald Trump, or I don't know, whoever, or we'll get Hillary Clinton for whatever happened, or the different people are trying to attack their political rivals by using the justice system and their control over the prosecutorial power of the government to go after their enemies. And if they're in power, maybe on the right or the left, the first thing they're going to do is, I'm going to find some way to put my opponent in jail or prison, or I'll make him spend all his money and all his efforts to avoid the charges that I'm going to bring, having prevailed in this arrangement. Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm sure a lot of people would like that to happen. There are, when you hear about somebody who is a law and order candidate or something like that, obviously they're playing to a base. But once you come in the door of the courtroom, you have to play by certain rules, or at least ideally you're supposed to be able to play by certain rules. And if you've got a biased judge who is not enforcing those rules, then the defense has got ways to combat that. The one thing that you really can't deal with to any great degree is just the disparity of resources. So if I'm a prosecutor and I want to make a name for myself as the get tough law and order prosecutor so I can run for governor
yes.
in a few years' time, Well, if I want to go after very rigorously every murderer or every crack dealer or something like that, and I pour money into that, then that's one thing. Now, if I go in and start violating legal ethics and paying off witnesses, that's an entirely different matter, and I don't think all the money in the world is going to permit that.
Well, just one of the issues I think with the Trump story is that the Russian arrangement, and supposedly some of his allies they went through a bogus prosecution, and they were bankrupt by that. Mm-hmm. So if you really want to injure someone, all you have to do is to say the protection of the courtroom is irrelevant. If you're going to have lawyers that you spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to look after your interests, at the end of this, you've lost that money, and apparently that's one of the issues that's out there.
Well, you can file malicious prosecution claims, so that's a response to that. I mean, if you're being repeatedly targeted by the same office over and over again, you can bring a federal action, a Section 1983 action, punitive damages, and you end up a lot richer than you were before you started getting targeted.
You have to spend money to do that, just to make another comment.
Well, these days it's easy to start a Patreon or GoFundMe account, and given our polarization in this kind of society, there would be people with very deep pockets who would fund that lawsuit.
Yes.
It's not a perfect system, but once again, unless we want to go full Marxist, there are going to be inequalities in the system. There are going to be inequalities of the firepower that you have on your legal team, but there are certain rules that say at a certain point the politics stop at the door.
Yes. Well, looking at our situation, one of the things, the jury pool, and so it was alleged in the Aubrey trial that it was a largely Caucasian jury, and thus it was impossible to have a fair trial. That was really touted widely.
Yes.
That the race issue is so powerful in the country that no matter whatever the facts are, if your fellow racial brother is on trial, you'll always find him innocent or guilty, as witnessed by the O.J. trial, which I think it's fair to say most observers would think he was guilty.
Yes.
I have no problem saying that, and that the racial issues let him off. Many people, I think, would believe that, and of course that's a very corrosive set of facts there, and the fact that Aubrey was a Caucasian jury convicted his people that injured him or killed him. That was very reassuring, I think, for the country.
Yes. Well, that brings up the matter of, we could talk about peremptory challenges, but we'll probably have to carry that over into our next episode, because we've not even gotten into the Rittenhouse or Arbery trials themselves. So I think there's a lot still to be said on these
We'll
matters.
have to keep discussing that.
Yes.
Well, once again, Buck, it's been a pleasure having you here, and hearing these years of collective wisdom has been accumulating upstairs here, and it's good to spring forth and let the world see some of it. So,
well, I don't know how much wisdom I've got, but even if I have a teeny bit of wisdom, I'm afraid we're moving into times where wisdom doesn't really count for a whole lot in this society.
Well, I think being a fair observer is an important virtue. So we'll talk some more. Thank you for being with us tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.